the middle screen to Adams. Ooh, he got popped in the face.
Oh my
Mouth guard comes out, and they're asking for help right away.
Jim, oh no.
And a flag.
That looked bad. He's already hit down. That's your frustration being taken out right there. That's not okay right there. This guy's already wrapped up. Oh.
Tony Romo didn't like the hit. Scary moment in the Packers' win over the Bears on Thursday night. Davante Adams carted off the field after being hit by Danny Trevathan. Trevathan was flagged for the hit, although the collective response of the internet was to call for an ejection that never came. Here's what Trevathan said about the hit after the game. I regret the level I hit him at, but you got to understand, I had momentum, and I was just trying to make a play. As Robin Lundberg here with me, as always, do you think this was a dirty hit by Danny Trevathan?
Technically, it was a dirty hit. I don't think it was maliciously a dirty hit. We have the advantage of looking at snapshots and all that. You have to put yourself in the player's shoes for a second, where I'm sure they're taught to complete the play and play until the whistle is blown. And there's a fine line between leading with your helmet and having your head up to make the tackle. Obviously, he led with his helmet. That's the problem there. But I don't think this was intent to injure. And I also think, in a sense, sometimes this is our guilty conscience, because the more we know now about head injuries and head trauma with football, the harsher our reaction is. I actually take his comments at face value, where he regrets what happened, and we all hope that, Adams is okay here, but that wasn't his intent.
I think it's really hard, though, to judge a man's intent. It's really hard to be in their head, because you could also take a look at this from 30,000 feet and say they're trailing. You have other Packers players who've been injured. Maybe they're vulnerable. You have a team in the Bears that hasn't won a game yet, and if you win a division game in Lambeau, that could potentially change the entire trajectory of your season, maybe, although we're not expecting a lot from the Bears. I think it's dangerous to judge a man's intent. I think this was definitely a suspect hit. I'll put it that way. Dirty, maybe, because I can understand wanting to finish the play, but if you are Danny Trevathan and you've been in this league for 6 years, there has been an emphasis now of leading with the shoulder. And I'm not sure after all this time he would suddenly forget that after all the game experience that he has. These guys have been able to make changes to their behavior. So when maybe the instinct kicks in, or maybe they want to put a little extra something on a hit, I think it has to be read as being intentional. And in terms of suspension, we saw Vontaze Burfict. He, in the preseason, was given a 5-game suspension that was reduced to 3. I would expect this starts at a 3-game suspension, and because everything's negotiable now with suspensions, it actually goes down to 1.
Let's go now to Jenny Varentes of the MMQB, who's here with us courtesy of Toyota. Let's go places. Jenny, we heard from the ref last night on how he saw the Trevathan hit. He said, quote, he was being stood up. That's when 59 came in and hit a defenseless player in the helmet area unnecessarily. From my perspective, I just didn't see enough to have it rise to that level, referencing, of course, of being ejected, end quote. Jenny, you've talked to players. How fine is the line between dirty hit and trying to make a play?
Yeah, it's going to be a judgment call. But, this past offseason, the NFL made a point of emphasis toward allowing officiating crews to eject people for what they considered catastrophic or especially egregious hits. So it wasn't a rule change, but it was a point of emphasis. It's not as black and white as, say, the college targeting rule, but it would allow a referee in a case like this to eject Trevathan. And I do think that's what should have happened, because this, whatever the intention was, it was a catastrophic hit. The ball carrier was stood up. He wasn't advancing any farther. And you see Trevathan go in there, lower his head so hard that his mouth guard pops out. So this one will be used, I believe, as an example of this should have been an ejection. This will probably lead to a suspension. And I think, as is the case with many of these points of emphasis, sometimes there needs to be a case during the season that doesn't go the way the league intended it to go, to use as an example. And I think this will certainly be used as an example, because the reason they allowed for the ejection, they wanted to make that emphasis this offseason, was because they felt like enough of these hits weren't getting taken out of the game. The current penalty, system wasn't legislating them out of the game enough. And a case like this is certainly the kind of hit that needs to be legislated out of the game.
Do you expect a suspension? And if so, how many games?
I do expect a suspension. It's hard to say because, there's a difference between repeat offenders and a case like this, right? So I don't know off the top of my head Trevathan's history. I can't remember him necessarily being involved in a bunch of suspensions like this. I would guess it starts at one game. That would be my expectation, especially because this point of emphasis is sort of the allowing for the ejection and the suspension. You know, the ejection part of it is new this year, right? And they didn't do the ejection during the game, so I would imagine that they would, enforce a suspension for one game afterward.
Of course, it wasn't just Davante Adams who suffered an injury on Thursday night. The Packers also lost their top 2 running backs in Ty Montgomery and Jamal Williams. And even with these injuries, Aaron Rodgers threw 4 touchdown passes and pushed the Packers to 3-1 on the year. That makes him our adrenaline performer. It is presented by Toyota. Let's go places. The Packers signal caller now has 10 touchdown passes on the season. Rodgers has a 15-4 record against the rival Bears. Jenny, will all the injuries, though, to the Packers put more pressure on Rodgers?
Well, it's interesting because the Packers' injury history has been a bleak one dating back to their Super Bowl. I mean, even that year, 2010, when they won the Super Bowl, I believe they had 15 players on injured reserve. So this has sort of been a chronic problem with the Packers. But really, they've been able to overcome it depending on where the injuries have been on the roster. Now, we remember that year when Rodgers himself had that calf injury that he played through but severely limited his mobility. That limited the Packers' hopes that year. The year they lost Jordy Nelson, the same thing. As long as they have Rodgers and Jordy Nelson, they should be able to continue rolling as they have been. But, every year it's kind of the question, is it critical mass? I mean, listen, a running back going down is par for the course in Packers land. I mean, we seem to see this every year. Who are they going to put at running back? It seems to always be a dearth of players at the position. Both starting tackles were out last night, and Rodgers was able to still, like you say, have a brilliant performance. So, as long as Rodgers is fully healthy and Jordy Nelson is the number 2 player on that roster, at least on offense in terms of making everything work. But it is a perennial issue that the Packers always have to overcome, and probably a reason they haven't won a Super Bowl since 2010.
From a great quarterback situation to a not so great quarterback situation, what are the Bears going to do there? Are we going to see Trubisky in action soon?
It seemed like John Fox was open to the possibility after the game. The Bears have started 1-3 now. They have a sort of mini bye. They play on Thursday night, and they don't play again until Monday night. So if you were going to make a change, you could say that now would be a good time, timing-wise, to make the change. There's a few different factors at play. I mean, first of all, it was always kind of an issue of, okay, when are they going to deem Trubisky ready, right? They believe that he's a franchise quarterback for the long term. You don't want to rush him out there. You have this quarterback, Lennon, you paid a lot of money to in the offseason to sort of be a bridge to Trubisky. But now that isn't working so well, and the Bears are finding themselves in a tough spot. And interestingly, you have competing timelines here, right? You have John Fox, who's in his 3rd season, who has not won a lot of games, is certainly on the hot seat. Does he go to Trubisky to provide a spark to say, hey, this is the guy for the future. I deserve to be here another year. So I always think it's interesting when you have a rookie quarterback and you have a coach on the hot seat. It's a difficult situation because you may want to wait to put Trubisky out there, but the coach probably can't afford to wait.
Jenny Vrentis of the mmqb.com. A lot to look forward to as we're in now the quarter turn of the NFL season, which is a little hard to believe. Thank you.
Thanks for having me.
Clearly, this issue has a lot of you riled up. That would be Danny Trevathan's hit. Jimmy weighs in on Facebook Live. I love the Chicago Bears, but leading with the crown of your helmet is always wrong, and there's no place in the quote-unquote new NFL. Daniel follows up on that. 5 years ago, that hit would have been on the highlight reels for being a great play. And then Kathy says, suspend him, while Ryan writes in, no, it's football. Keep those comments coming. We'll be monitoring them throughout the show. But meanwhile, the NBA preseason begins tomorrow, which is the first time we'll see if any NBA players decide to take a knee. The NBA has a rule against kneeling, and Commissioner Adam Silver recently said this: it's been a rule as long as I've been involved with the league, and my expectation is that our players will continue to stand for the anthem. It is my hope, though, that with NBA players, that given the platform that they have those opportunities for their voices to be heard. So, Robin, what did you think of Silver's comments?
Well, I don't think they're necessary in a sense, because what he said is kind of accurate. And I think any speaking out and saying that they don't want guys to protest during the national anthem slightly increases the chances of it happening, because I don't have an expectation for it to happen at a high level or maybe at all in the NBA because of what Adam Silver said, because I do feel that NBA players believe they are recognized as individuals, they have a platform to speak out, and they are not muted by the league. I think the dynamic is different than the NFL, where it seems to me the makeup of NFL ownership and NBA ownership is different, and that there's an adversarial relationship between NFL players and NFL ownership, which makes those guys feel like they're cogs in the machine rather than individual voices, which I don't think NBA players feel.
Or true partners. Honestly, I'm shocked by this. I'm shocked that Adam Silver would say this, because this is a man who, in his first big move as commissioner, banned Donald Sterling, a known racist, for life. This is clearly, in some ways, a very black and white issue. We've acknowledged that. And I think the fact that Silver would say or imply to any of his players, hey, you can't, there's a time and place, which is what Roger Goodell said, and we skewered him for it, right? Isn't the whole idea that if the players want to use the biggest platform they have, that they should be able to? Michael Bennett said this. It's about making people uncomfortable. I think the players want to do that. They have every right to do it. I mean, I know they are personal brands, and I know they are superstars who have guaranteed contracts, but at their core, they're NBA players. And that's what makes this, I think, so just shocking by Adam Silver, that he wouldn't say, do whatever you think is right. We are partners with you in this moving forward.
I don't disagree, but they did put out a memo encouraging guys to take social stances.
Just as long as it's not at a game.
But when you say time and place, like Goodell said, there is parsing of the language, right? In a sense, it says the same thing, but the tone doesn't come across the same. And as far as it being the place where they can be most effective, for some of the NBA guys, because I would argue in all of American sports at least, individually, they are the most recognizable. The platform in front of a microphone for them speaks a lot more loudly than it does for many individual NFL players who aren't recognized amongst the crowd.
No, I get that, but I think that if Silver is going to tell them, listen, do it on your own time, I think that the NBA players, essentially what he's saying, do it on your own time, and maybe on your own dime. And I think that that's something where the players, maybe if they weren't planning to protest, I think now they might be thinking differently. Like, hey, I thought you had our back.
I think it slightly increases the chances of it happening, but I don't think the NBA players view Adam Silver in the way many NFL players might view Roger Goodell.
You know what? It's tricky because these relationships are ongoing, and we saw how things changed between the players and David Stern over the years, and we're going to have some labor situations and contracts that are going to be coming up very soon, and I think all of this kind of goes into it.
I guess we'll see in a couple weeks. Right?
I guess we will see that. Meanwhile, back at the NCAA, the FBI investigation is ongoing into the alleged bribery scandal that is rocking college basketball. Michael McCann is our legal expert. He joins us now. And Michael, we know the adults in this case are facing serious repercussions, but what could happen to the basketball players themselves if they are found to have accepted bribes?
Yeah, Maggie, the basketball players themselves could be charged, at least in theory. They would have been part of a conspiracy to take a bribe. There may also be wire fraud, depending upon the circumstances in which they arranged for any payments, or family members were part of it. I don't think we're going to see that happen. I don't think the Justice Department views the players, some of whom are pretty young, as part of the conspiracy. I think in a lot of ways they're victims of the conspiracy, that they're being sort of tempted with money to violate their NCAA amateurism eligibility, and also that they're being put in positions where they have to take money under the table. I think it's worth asking, should this be over the table? Should they be allowed to take the money in some process where there's accountability with tax records and the like?
Do you think shoe companies could be sanctioned? What is the possible fallout there?
Yeah, Robin, I think they could be sanctioned in the sense that these companies could be charged with crimes. We already saw two actually, executives at a shoe company charged, and it wouldn't surprise me if we see others at those companies. Then there's the prospect of civil liability, where there may have been breached contracts depending upon obligations that a shoe company has to other contract and vendors. The scope of liability could be pretty extensive.
Michael, you enlightened us earlier this week that it was, I believe, Teddy Roosevelt who was the one who implemented the NCAA, or at least got the ball rolling on what became the NCAA. If they are going to undergo significant changes to their rules, I mean, how easy or difficult do you think that process would be?
I think it would be difficult in the sense that there are so many members of the NCAA that have adjusted to a set of rules that have been in place for a long time, and that transition from going to one system to a totally different system would be hard, probably, in fairness to schools. On the other hand, there's such momentum to make changes. There's such momentum to say, look, this whole amateurism system, it just doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense because we know it's not being followed. We know the NCAA doesn't have the capacity to enforce it. And we know there are real fairness questions with college coaches making $7 million or more a year, and the student athletes make at most the value of their tuition, so and other benefits. I think there's great momentum to have change, but you're right, Maggie, in noting that change won't happen overnight, that there would have to be a transition period that would allow schools and their athletic departments to learn new rules. It also impacts tax issues in terms of how the IRS classifies athletic departments and nonprofit status. So it's complicated. There's no question about it. But just because it's complicated doesn't mean it shouldn't happen. It just may take longer than people want.
Michael McCann, our legal expert. Always appreciate your expertise, Michael. Thanks. Have a great weekend.
Thanks, Maggie.
Recently, Mets legend Darryl Strawberry was kind enough to join us in our studio. Our own Ryan Aselta interviewed number 18, who discussed his thoughts on athlete protest and explains how President Trump and George Steinbrenner are more alike than we think.
All right, Daryl, your book, Don't Give Up on Me, Shedding Light on Addiction, really is an open book to your life. What was it like being part of this process, sharing these stories, a lot of stories, personal stories about abuse, addiction? Was it kind of therapeutic for you to do this?
Well, yeah, it's always therapeutic, but I think it was really important when our team came together. Myself, Ron Doc, John Picciano, and the doctors and Sean the writer came together because of the crisis that we're having in America, the epidemic we're having with addiction, and so many people are losing their life. And we just really wanted to get to a place where we get back to educating people, because the stigma on addiction is people are weak. And you know, we have all these young suburban kids now are losing their life because of opiates and heroin addiction. And we have 2 treatment centers down in Florida, and I've seen it. And we just got to that place where I needed to open up. They asked me, would I write this book to open up to probably help and bring a message across America that would try to make a difference and get into schools and educate the kids.
I want to get to that in just a bit about the opioid epidemic. First, let me ask about you. You had addiction issues way back to your childhood, yet you were able to thrive as an athlete. How were you able to do that?
Well, it's a good question. You know, I was really able to do it because it was my pain, the pain I was in for my father being an alcoholic, and you know, coming home for the last time, and you know, after beating the crap out of me and coming home, pulling out a shotgun, said he was going to kill the whole family when I was 13 years old. And it was through my pain that led me to my greatness. And then eventually my greatness will lead me to my destructive behavior in my life. Nothing never changes unless you fix the inside of what's happening to a person. We can all look great on the outside. We can dress up and put clothes on. But brokenness is real. And when we understand brokenness, we have to get healed.
The opioid use, it's being prescribed as painkillers for young kids. How serious, in your eyes, is the epidemic, is the problem right now?
It's very serious. It's a crisis. You know, I think most people don't realize how many young people are dying. You know, I was with the governor in Pennsylvania. About 4,500 people are going to probably die this year. They had 3,500 last year. That's a high rate. And everywhere you go, it's because of the opiates. And what people don't understand about it, the kids are too young, and anytime your mind gets altered, it's going to change forever. And when it changes forever, you can't get off of it. And that's why you have to educate people about it. I keep going back. That's why we wrote this book, you know, to bring some education. What happens? See, the book is just not about me. It's about doctors and psychiatrists and Ron Doc and John Picciano, who's people that's been in the field, that understand addiction and been in the field for a long time, and we understand what's going on, and we know there's an urgency to do something different to try to save lives.
A lot of athletes these days are becoming political, taking certain stances on political, social issues. Colin Kaepernick, obviously the biggest name that we've associated with this movement right now. Should athletes be doing this? Is this their place? Should they use their platform as an athlete to talk about social issues and political issues?
Well, I mean, it's okay to talk about them, but protesting. I think you only have one shot at your career, and you need to make the best out of your career. And if you're done, you can do that. Listen, I get it. You think I wasn't criticized and had racial issues when I went through the minor leagues? I mean, I was a high bonus baby, and there was some racial things said about me when I was in Lynchburg, Virginia, and even at the major league level. But I would never protest due to the fact because someone has said something about me. That means I'm giving them power over me, and I get it what these players are saying, and I understand that, and I don't take anything away from them. They have the right to do whatever they want to. But me personally, I dealt with it a different way, and I channel my energy out there to perform and have a career. Because if you don't, publicly they're going to punish you for it. I believe they will. Fans will punish you for it. Media will punish you for it. And I think a lot of times we didn't have so much social media like the guys have today, and we didn't have to deal with that. But I do get it. I do understand their point.
You got to know President Trump on Celebrity Apprentice. You've said in the past you like the guy. This was, coming off of the show. The guy you met, the guy you got to know back then, is that the same man that's in the Oval Office right now?
Well, I mean, he's probably different as being the president because now he has major responsibilities and he has a lot to deal with and a lot on his plate. And I think we all just need to pray for him and support him. Regardless of whoever's in the president, we need to support whatever president that comes through because they got a job to do. And we're in a lot of crisis and we got a lot of things sitting on the table. And he's trying to do the best that he can. He's not going to be bullied, I can tell you that. I know him from that, and he's been a good man to me, regardless of what anybody else has to say. I mean, I probably take a lot of hits for it, but you know what? He's always been gracious to me, and I respect that when people have treated me that way because he didn't have to. But he reminds me of the boss, just like George was for the Yankees. They were very gracious people, and they care about people, and sometimes people misunderstand that.
Yeah, are there some similarities between Donald Trump and George Steinbrenner?
Yeah, they are. When you look at them, they're going to voice their opinion. They're going to be in control all the time, and they're in power. And there's nothing wrong with that because it's the way you display your power and the way you use it to not let people run over you. And that's what I really like about those two gentlemen. They didn't allow the media or anybody to run over them.
Let me ask you about the Mets. You've been public about your, I guess you'd say, your lack of relationship with the Mets at this point. Why is that? Why haven't you and some of the 1986 guys been brought back to Citi Field now, celebrated more than we've seen over the years?
Well, that's a good question. We wonder what did we ever do but win. We put together winning seasons most of the time, our time together, not just that 86 team, but the start of 84, 85, 6, 7, all those years, we believe that we played well enough, and we played for the fans. So, my life is really dedicated, and my joy is really dedicated to the fans forever, Met fans forever. That will never change. I will always be number 18, and I will always be grateful for the time I played at Shea Stadium and what we accomplished as a group with the manager, Davey Johnson, general manager, Frank Cashin, and it's just a sour taste, when you have an owner that just really doesn't have a great deal of respect for you, and that's all. I'm not bitter or anything. I'm very happy with life, and I'm just disappointed in a lot of things and some personal things, that I never will talk about unless they want to sit down and talk about it. But it's some personal things that they did to me and other players that I just really don't appreciate. So I just had to move on.
Yeah, would you be open to talking with the Wilpons if they gave you that opportunity at some point?
Well, I mean, it's never been about Fred Wilpon. He's always been good, and it's been new ownership. His son runs the team, so if he ever has a chance where he wants to sit down and talk about them and let me voice my opinion on some things, and I'm willing to do it, but I'm not going to go out of my way.
Way to put it, Daryl. The book, Don't Give Up on Me, is out October 16th. Daryl Strawberry, thanks for being with us.
Thanks for having me.
Appreciate it.
It's time for SI Now's Weekend Drive presented by Toyota. Let's go places. We'll start in Denver with the NFL to see the Broncos take on their division rivals, the Oakland Raiders. Both teams are coming off tough losses and will look to prove Week 3 was just a fluke. Denver's defense is first against the rush, and outside linebacker Von Miller knows he'll have his hands full with Raiders running back Marshawn Lynch.
There was one time where I tried to tackle him, Seattle Seahawks, and I had him behind the line. It was like a yard. And I had him like, I think I had like one leg, and he drug me for the next two and got the first down. So you just gotta get him on the ground. Usually when you get a running back like that, he'll just fall. But Marshawn, he's definitely beast mode. They call him that for a reason.
Raiders quarterback Derek Carr will need his run game to get going. He has been sacked 12 times and has thrown 4 interceptions to only 6 touchdowns against Denver's defense in his career. Next, we go to Baltimore, where the Steelers will battle the Ravens. After a 44-7 pummeling in London in the worst game of his career, Ravens quarterback Joe Flacco is looking to right the ship against his bitter division rival.
I think we're getting ahead of ourselves when we all of a sudden start saying we haven't played well for 3 weeks. We played terribly last week. There's no way around that. But the other 2 weeks, we did what we had to do to win football games. And I don't think that's anything that we can hang our head over.
This has the makings for an exciting game. 12 of the last 18 meetings between these two teams has been decided by 3 points or fewer. Lastly, we'll end in Pullman, Washington for college football. 16th ranked Washington State and their air raid offense will host number 5 USC. Sam Darnold has received all the hype as the likely top pick in next year's NFL draft, but Cougars head coach Mike Leach isn't buying into it just yet.
Well, I think he could be. I don't think he is today. I get a kick out of everybody thinks one 18-year-old after another is ready to go to the NFL. I think that's laughable, and at the rate we're going with that. I mean, just for 1 year. Now, there would be some casualties, and those would be those 18-year-olds that selected to go. And it would be brutal. And and it would be terribly brutal. And it would literally destroy some lives, too.
Washington State should have a chip on their shoulder in this game. USC has dominated the Cougars on their home turf, winning the last 5 games in a row in Pullman. And that's what's in store for this weekend.